The Iran nuclear deal is in the hands of Congress, and now they're going to have 60 days to review it. But the question is, will they get behind it? Congressman Jim Himes, Democrat of Connecticut, here to talk about that and why he's furious at Governor Chris Christie. Then, Donald Trump, he's at it again. We're going to show you his latest stunt and ask our political panel why, as much as a clown as he may be, he's resonating with so many in the American public. Also, Mayor Bill de Blasio says the police department has made reforms since the death of Eric Garner. We'll ask a civil rights and criminal justice expert whether they're really making a real difference. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to RFL. Thank you so much for joining us. I am Richard French, and the clock is ticking on the nuclear Iranian deal. Congress, they've got 60 days now to review it, and the UN just unanimously voted to endorse it and drop sanctions against Iran. But it is still an extremely divisive issue in our nation's capital. Yesterday, I sat down with Congressman Jim Himes, Democrat from Connecticut, and I asked him about Iran and a whole lot more. The Iran nuclear deal. I know you had a lot of questions, and you certainly believe that Congress should have an active voice in this debate. And I also listened to your constituents. Before we get to the temperature on Capitol Hill, what's your sense of the deal, whether it'll make America safer or not? And also, what's the feedback you got from your constituents?
Yeah, I think, there's sort of been two categories of feedback. One have been the people who, frankly, before the deal was announced, were out, blistering the thing. And what that effectively does is it means you're not taking this very seriously,
Yep.
Which when you're talking about, war and peace and the Middle East and hugely profound things is not constructive, to say the least. I have a little bit more work to do. This thing is 150 plus pages. It's got classified annexes, so I've got a little bit more work to do. But it looks largely to abide by the framework agreement that was reached several months ago, which has already caused Iran to sort of dial back on its centrifuges and its 20% uranium. So I guess I'd characterize myself as cautiously optimistic that this thing, to your question, will it make us safe? It's not the deal any of us wanted to celebrate. This arms going to Iran, the fact that after 15 years, some of these things, some of the restrictions lift. But that 15 years, that's 15 years. When, if they don't cheat, and that's a big if, of course, and that's some work yet to be done, where we're not worrying about them making a breakout sprint towards a nuclear weapon with all of the implications that has, including possibly our going to wars.
You mentioned that 15-year window, and you also mentioned the other concern that people have had is, what has Tehran done whatsoever to earn trust here? Do you believe that there will be enough transparency and our inspectors will get the unfettered access they need? Has the administration given you guys enough comfort here that, trust me, this will be trust but verify?
Yeah, in the grand scheme of things, Iran has done almost nothing to earn, as you say, our trust, except for one thing, which is that they have been in compliance with the term of the interim agreement, which was struck a number of months ago, which actually had a lot of requirements on them to shut down a lot of centrifuges, to downblend a lot of highly enriched uranium, and they did all that. And as a member of the Intelligence Committee, that's one of the first questions I ask every week when I get to D.C. So that's a very small thing, a very small trust-building mechanism. And look, you don't trust the Iranians. You just don't. And so what you do is, as you made the point, you have a very rigorous insight into what it is that they're doing, surveillance, obviously, and that's official and unofficial. Officially, IAEA inspectors will be able to ultimately go into all sites, and there is, unfortunately, their ability to sort of slow that for a period of time around some military sites. But in addition to the official inspections we of course, spend an awful lot of money on our intelligence operation for a reason, so we'll be using those means as well to verify that they are in fact abiding by the terms of the agreement.
Some of your colleagues got very tender over the fact that the UN basically also unanimously voted to lift the sanctions before Congress got to cast their vote. Is this more semantics, or is there substance to the frustration?
Well, it frustrates me. I mean, there's a number of elements of this deal that are frustrating. One, it would have been great for the UN to go behind the decision of the U.S. Congress, but in that case, the Russians and the Chinese felt pretty adamantly. And remember, the Russians and the Chinese are critical allies in this. As they, and this even annoys me more, felt adamant about selling 5 and 8 years from now conventional weapons to the Iranians. When we split that way, when the Chinese and the Russians are standing with the Iranians and we're on the other side, good things don't happen.
Let me piggyback up. You mentioned, obviously, on the Intelligence Committee. We've heard from intelligence experts, especially in the wake of that tragedy in Chattanooga, the biggest fear experts in the field have is this lone wolf element. And the investigation's still ongoing. Who knew what chatter there was, were other people behind this? That all said, you get briefings. Obviously, you can't share all the details with us. How much does the intelligence community believe that they, as it relates to ISIS at least, that they know who are the targeted elements domestically, and how much are they concerned that, you know, they're always being reactive rather than proactive?
Yeah. Well, as somebody who spends a lot of time thinking about these threats and operating with our intelligence community, first of all, it's not the biggest threat. Lone wolf threats are scary, and they are a threat. But the biggest threats, look, I could name several that are bigger threats. The idea of a loose nuke, of Al-Qaeda or somebody getting hold of a loose Pakistani or loose Russian nuke and floating that thing into London or New York Harbor, that's a bigger threat, as is, frankly, some of the cyber activity that we've seen. You know, heaven forbid, some organization or some country or some terrorist group decides to shut down the Florida electrical networks. We're going to see an awful lot more people in harm's way than through one of these lone wolf attacks. That said, those things are harder to pull off, obviously, and though they are more catastrophic, you know, you really focus on them. These lone wolf attacks are very, very hard, Richard, because as we've seen now with the Tsarnaev brothers in Boston, and of course this latest thing in Chattanooga, they don't necessarily involve people hooking up with Al-Qaeda or ISIS in Syria or somebody in Pakistan. You know, when people start traveling or making phone calls or searching internet sites, our people are pretty good. They can often get a lead or a tip on that stuff. And of course, to organize something big, you've got to do that kind of organization. But somebody who's sitting alone in a basement, becoming what they say self-radicalized, there's very little that our law enforcement or intelligence community can do if that individual truly decides they're going to do what the Tsarnaev brothers did, and of course what this individual did in Chattanooga, and hurt or kill a bunch of people.
Let me get to a couple of financial questions. And obviously, before you came to Washington, this was the world you lived in. 5 years later, Dodd-Frank, did it make the necessary corrections to the banking industry? Looking back, has it created more hurdles for some that want to make investments, and did it really not stop what it was intended? What's your sense here with the benefit of hindsight?
Yeah, so here we are 5 years from the signing of Dodd-Frank, and I would answer your question with a resounding yes, with a little asterisk on it. Yes, look, you know, Dodd-Frank did away with a lot of the crazy behavior that led to the crisis in 2008. The insanity in the mortgage market of selling people mortgages they couldn't possibly repay, of bundling up toxic mortgages and, you know, labeling them AAA and you know, selling them through derivatives and everything. That world is gone. That world is long gone. And the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau, the new regulation of derivatives, these are all really good things that have really made for a safer, more stable system. The asterisk comes with the fact that it may, in certain areas, we may not know if it did the trick. Too big to fail, right? You know, we still have, in fact, have more and larger, I should say fewer and larger financial institutions than we've ever had. And it's, you know, even though the government has lots more authority over a Citibank or a JP Morgan Chase, you know, until they stumble, we're not going to really know whether those authorities are enough to prevent ever having to do a bailout again. So there's you know, and there are other little questions in markets. You know, the mortgage market is not what we want it to be, even though a lot of the toxicity has been removed from it. Most mortgages are still backed by the federal government. There's not enough private dollars in there. So we do have tweaks that absolutely need to be made to Dodd-Frank. But you know, when Dodd-Frank was written, the Republicans in particular were saying this is going to be a job killer. It's going to eliminate credit, and of course the opposite has been true. We've seen almost 13 million new jobs created, and in fact the credit markets, by and large, and the stock market are doing pretty darn well.
And when we come back, Congressman Himes goes directly after the guy on your screen, Chris Christie, slamming the governor for his comments following the death of a former intern, even accusing him of thinly veiled racism.